Hey, it's the three baritones here. Week 4 and special week 4 Sunday morning game, Sunday afternoon if you are in London. The Saints and the Dolphins. The Jay Cutler Show, the big Jay Cutler Show. Gene Bramwell, I'll toss it to you for a game update.
Yeah, Jay Cutler giveth and Jay Cutler taketh away. I thought he looked pretty good on that first series, moving in the pocket. Nice accurate throws to Devontae Parker and Jarvis Landry and even Julius Thomas, who was wide open over the middle. And then I don't know if that was more Julius Thomas failing on the route or just a poor decision overall, but interception in the end zone. Looks like the Saints are using Alvin Kamara a ton here too. I don't know if that's his third or fourth catch, but moving him in lots of different places, split outside the numbers there. Looks like it's going to be a big part of the game plan.
Yeah, a big part of the game plan here is the offense did look good. The Dolphins offense. So, we have the Dolphins offense looking solid at the Chargers week 2, dysfunctional, non-functional at the Jets in week 3. And now here in week 4 in London against the Saints, that bad old Saints defense was back. Cutler was looking good. And I agree with you, Gene, looking at the throw that, Julius Thomas didn't really make a play on the ball, but it was also not exactly where you'd want to place the ball on a fade. Now the Saints are driving down the field. And one thing I'll lead right in, and we'll start getting to week 4 injuries and breaking down some stuff as we're watching this game. Matt, after we see, okay, well, Jay Cutler can make the Saints defense look like the bad old Saints defense. Does that mean you're stepping away even faster from Cam Newton? Or would you dabble in Cam Newton against the Patriots defense? Because the Patriots have been the other defense that has been money paying off like a rigged slot machine for fantasy. But last week, Newton couldn't do it at home against this Saints defense.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been a Newton fan pretty much all summer. So this is just kind of confirmation for what I've been thinking about him anyway. I don't think that I think that he's a guy that you're probably going to have to just make the tough decision and say, he's on my bench at the very least, if not not off your team, just because this team doesn't have any wide receivers. When people say to me, should I keep so-and-so over, and then you have Devin Funchess is part of your lineup. Devin Funchess was a very good college player. He's not a good NFL player, period. Don't have him on your team. It's just stupid. I mean, I hate to say it any other way than that, but he can't catch. He can't run a route. He can't stay healthy. He doesn't seem to concentrate well. This is a guy in his 4th year. When you can't get it done by year 4 and you have that many problems, and that's their best wide receiver right now. Yeah. That's their most veteran, experienced wide receiver who's healthy. Kelvin Benjamin, you got to worry about, at this point. But Devin Funchess, get him off your team. Benjamin, I mean, he's going to get double covered or he's going to have looks that aren't favorable, and he still can't get past press coverage. So you don't have your best players are basically Christian McCaffrey or Greg Olsen.
And Olsen's out, yeah. It's going to be McCaffrey. McCaffrey's going to catch like 12 or 13 balls today in this game. And they may all be in the second half or most in the second half. Gene, let's go ahead and jump into probably the biggest question. It's the biggest question because in terms of risk reward, you can help us on the risk side, but we know the reward when Doug Baldwin plays with Russell Wilson. When Wilson's playing well, he was playing really well in the second half. Baldwin had 10 catches before he left the game. If Baldwin, speaking of 12 or 13 catches, if Baldwin had stayed healthy through the game against Tennessee last week, Baldwin might have had 13, 14, 15 catches. Going against Indianapolis, and I suppose the reward is Indianapolis, not one of the better defenses, although Vontae Davis is back. Although I suppose it also adds risk that if Seattle's up by 21 at the half, then they put Baldwin back on the shelf. What do we do to advise people that have to make their Baldwin decisions now or for the 4:00 p.m. Eastern games and don't have a Paul Richardson or Tyler Lockett or somebody in their back pocket?
Yeah, I think that's the key. I think if you have anybody that has wide receiver 3 or better upside, I think you probably need to play him or find a hedge for afterwards that you trust well enough so that you don't end up with a 0 or very low ceiling in that spot. Doug Baldwin has been pretty certain all week that he'll play, but the trend on Fridays in this post-practice conference and what Pete Carroll said, which was essentially they've got to see if he's okay to carry a full game plan because it doesn't seem like they want to use him much as a decoy. So they're going to find out in pregame warmups which part of the route tree he can run, how effective he might be, and then decide whether or not they're going to be able to play him. And right now, I think he's clearly questionable, probably more of a game time decision than even he wants to let on. So I think if he plays, they're probably going to use him enough. They're not going to put him out there for 60 snaps. This is going to be a Odell Beckham type situation from a couple of weeks ago. So if you've got somebody else that, you're not going to find another player on your roster probably that's similar to a healthy Doug Baldwin. But if you have somebody that's close enough or you have a hedge, then I think you can keep him in your lineup. But be careful with him today.
Man, how careful should we be with Russell Wilson? How careful should we be with Chris Carson with this Seattle offense? Because it felt like, and last year there was an injury, but still we're used to this drill with the Seattle offense. It takes Tom Cable a while to turn what they have on the offensive line into some sort of functional offensive line. It takes Russell Wilson a while to find his game. Sometimes it takes Seattle, Darrell Bevell, a while to realize, hey, he's our best player on offense. Let's make the offense center around him. Let him run. Let him run the no huddle. Let him be the point guard for this offense instead of limiting him. But last week in the second half, the stats flowed. If you took a chance on Wilson, you were rewarded. If you took a chance on Jimmy Graham, you were rewarded. Do we exhale and treat this Seattle offense the way we did in the second half of the season the last few years, even though it's only week 4?
No, not yet, because unfortunately the Seattle Seahawks are devolving into the pre-Marcus Mariota, Jeff Fisher, Tennessee Titans in terms of having coordinators who can't do their job. I mean, when you take a look at the situation, Darrell Bevell's had multiple years. You have Jimmy Graham, and you can't make Jimmy Graham be Jimmy Graham in that offense. Like you traded for him and you're going to stick him in line. That's stupid. Okay, so then you're going to go ahead and you're going to give Tom Cable personnel decisions on the offensive line to pick the players that he's going to fix up and do this midseason. That's also stupid. So when you look at it's stupid because we've looked at it for the past 3 years. This is a team that has Russell Wilson, who, in all honesty, whether you like his personality or not, could be the next Drew Brees. He literally has that kind of talent, and he's already taken them to 2 Super Bowls and literally gotten them on the precipice of that. And he's doing it basically having to dodge defenders who are coming through that Swiss cheese offensive line. So when you look at Chris Carson, I don't know why you start Chris Carson today. I understand that he's a good football player, but you look at the fact that the Indianapolis Colts actually can stop the run. They are a very good run defense. Ryan Hester does a great job in his trend spotting article, pointing that this is a funnel defense that funnels everything towards the passing game. So the fact that they can only infrequently run the ball, you may get a couple of nice big plays from Chris Carson. Yay. But then when you get to the goal line, they're going to throw the football. And the guy they're going to throw it to is going to be most likely Paul Richardson at this point, because he's the remaining healthy guy. So it's going to either be a run pass option with Russell Wilson running the ball in, or it's going to be Richardson, or you're hoping that somehow that on one of the first down plays that they actually run it just to honor the run, that Chris Carson gets a hole that he can run through. And it's not going to happen. So, no, we're not ready yet for that. This is a passing game. You start Russell Wilson. I've got him over Matthew Stafford and teams that I have Matthew Stafford. And I'm even starting him over Jared Goff. And Jared Goff's also another good one. But I would take Wilson still in this particular matchup.
Right. So basically you're saying warm on Wilson, lukewarm or cool or even cold across the rest of this offense tonight against Indy.
Yeah. Lukewarm on Lockett and Richardson. That's about as high as I can get on this.
And Gene, really quick, tight end is a bloodbath anyway, but any reason we should hesitate other than the things Matt was talking about? Anything medically should cause us hesitation with Jimmy Graham tonight?
Not at this point. He looked, not fully healthy last week, but healthy enough, got through the game without a setback, returned to a full practice by the end of this week, and isn't listed on the injury report at all. So, there may be a small issue with aggravation. He's not likely to be fully healed today, but there wasn't enough limitation last week to be concerned, especially after he seemed to do fine in practice this week.
Now we're watching Jay Ajayi this morning. He looks, we had a good wild stallion run there on the first drive, one where he looked like he got out of the chute. Cecil, did I get that right? Out of the chute like a bronco in a rodeo, and was throwing those riders off of him. Gene, what about Melvin Gordon? They seem like similar situations. And if you want to talk about Ajayi also, but people are looking at trading Gordon or Ajayi while they're still healthy. And you mentioned the role might be scaled back. That in and of itself gives you chills, but you may be able to get 50 cents on the dollar, knowing that. And with Gordon, we have the microfracture in the background. With Ajayi, we have the bone on bone or whispers about his knee that caused him to drop in the draft. Where are you at with these players? Gordon now, Ajayi, it's moot for week 4, but Gordon for week 4, and both of them, what's the best advice you can give us about their season-long outlook?
The Dolphins are running end zone fades to tight ends and read option.
They're the Wildcat, like they saw Ronnie Brown or something.
Yeah, where's Ronnie Brown anyway? That was a disappointing overall career for sure. I thought he was going to be big. Melvin Gordon's injury is probably not probably. I don't think it's related to the microfracture situation. I think if the bone bruise was to a weight-bearing part of the knee where the cartilage lives, he would have not been cleared to play last week. He wouldn't have been able to take 15 carries in the first half before a limited second half, and he wouldn't have been cleared to practice this week either, and certainly not return to a full, whatever the Friday full workload would have been anyway. But you're right that the situations are similar in that it's hard to handicap which snap or which series or which game might cause problems with these sort of chronic knee injuries, because it's not the same as waiting for a ligament injury to heal or making a decision on what to do with a meniscus tear. This is bone bruise for Gordon and just general soreness related to wear and tear for Ajayi. So if those are the sorts of things that scare you in a younger running back, knowing that there's some risk that there will be missed practice and you'll have to deal with these questions off and on through the rest of the year potentially, then I think maybe you move him and see what you can get. But as we're seeing with Ajayi here, when he's healthy enough, he looks fine. And the fact that he was able to return to full practices earlier this week was a pretty positive sign. The Dolphins, like what the Chargers are probably planning on doing here later today, are trying to limit the workload in practice and are trying to limit the workload in games. The offensive coordinator, Clyde Christensen, for the Dolphins said that they wouldn't use Ajayi much on passing downs, and that's what we're seeing here with Kenyon Drake. And I think it's going to be up to Melvin Gordon to see. But they know that they gave him 15 carries on 30-some snaps in the first half last week, and he did not do as well in the second half. So even though he's done more in practice, Gordon has this week, there's still some risk that at some point during the game today, he may have to rest for a period of time, or the Chargers would say, we're going to take it a little bit easier, give you a series off here or there, or we may not put you on the field for 8 to 10 snaps in a row. So I think we're probably going to see a little bit more Brandon Oliver. And people asked me this morning, well, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to say that they're healthier than they were last week, but you expect them to see a more limited workload. Well, I think that's what the coaches are telling us. And that's what the players have kind of shown you as well. Ajayi had a huge week 2 workload and was not effective last week. Now he's a little bit more effective. Last week, Melvin Gordon wasn't able to be there in the second half when they arguably needed him because of his higher workload in the first half. So we'll know today, based on how these players play and then recover, what to expect through the rest of the year. So I wouldn't be making any rash decisions. I don't have a huge concern for Melvin Gordon. I don't think a 25 touch ceiling is there, but he could certainly get 18 to 20.
Meanwhile, John Fox with Jordan Howard and his bad shoulder playing him in a blowout and letting him come back on the field like that is just nutty.
It's John Fox. Well, maybe he's just going out with a bang. Like when Trubisky comes in, that's the sign that the Fox era is over. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I bet Jordan Howard will be at his front door in a couple of years. That's all I.
Yeah, wherever he follows him to. On his next team, we're watching Miami drive down the field here. Is actually JJ has got 5 carries for 29 yards already and looking okay. Yeah. Matt, this Chargers Eagles game is really fascinating, and I've cited you many times talking about how the season works in these quarters, in these 4-game segments. We're at the end of this 4-game segment this week, but for some of these teams, it feels like we don't quite understand them much better than we did at the beginning of the season. So we look at this Eagles-Chargers matchup today. Really fascinating. On one hand, you have the Chargers who appear they want to run the offense through Melvin Gordon, but now, Melvin Gordon is taking a step back. With the knee, or the team's taking a step back from him. Also, last week, Phillip Rivers was trying to barnstorm. He was trying to take shots downfield, and the Chiefs' ball-hawking secondary really stung him. I'll just toss out there that I expect Keenan Allen to have a massive game today. And looking at the Eagles' defense that they're facing, the Giants were able to move the ball, especially in the second half, with quick passing. And it seems like with the Rivers and Eli forever tied together, was Eli Manning really bouncing back? I think if the Chargers are rational, assumption of rational coaching trips us up, you're going to have a lot of quick throws to Keenan Allen, quick breaking routes, and you move down the field that way. On the Eagles side of things, they had a Carson Wentz-centric offense. They lose Darren Sproles last week. They go with more Wendell Smallwood, go with more LeGarrette Blount, and a balanced offense, and they win a tough-fought NFC East game at home. They're going against the Chargers, who they did lose Jason Verrett, but they still have a good pass rush. You don't want to take the bull by the horns with Bosa and Ingram. Maybe rational coaching there dictates that it's a balanced offense, and it's more Blount and Smallwood and not as much Carson Wentz. What is your forecast for this very interesting Eagles-Chargers game today?
Yeah, I would say that Philadelphia definitely wants to get it to a lead early because then they could run on that defensive front and that defensive side of the ball because the Chargers cannot stop their run. The linebackers are not very good. The pass rush is great. And that's basically how you look at it. And so if they can run the ball, they're going to have a lot more success. So if you see them off to a good start on the ground today, that's a good sign for them. Rivers, I mean, the Chargers, I mean, if you look at it from historically with Phillip Rivers, the Chargers tend to stink in September. Rivers takes too many chances. They get close in games. They're about to win a game, and Ajay is mad about something. Maybe he's mad at Jay Cutler too. It seems like every player, every team.
The Jay Cutler show.
Yeah. I don't know what's going on, but he's mad. He's been yelling on the sideline. But back to the Chargers, where Rivers is probably smiling since he's also linked with Cutler. They have their fun little on-field rivalry. Rivers has lost 2 close games, and it's come down to the wire. But I think that against the Eagles, they're going to be able to throw against them. You'll see a lot of crossing routes, I believe. So like you said, Alan, I think that's a terrific point. Short, quick timing passes, as well as to Tyrell Williams. And they continue to do that, then they'll hope to take some deep shots with Travis Benjamin, who has been playing reasonably well now that he's fully healthy. The big question is whether Hunter Henry can have a decent day. He's been kind of, he's been way up in week 2 and way down the other 2 weeks. So, that's going to be interesting to see. I think part of it is how do they really balance this offensive game plan to be effective and find their stride? Because, yeah, they want to go through Melvin Gordon, but you think when you go through the run game that you get a little bit more tight end action in the play action passing game. But this team, one of the observations that I don't remember who was the commentator said last week that I thought was very true was that this team doesn't seem to have a good flow between run and pass with their game plan, and it doesn't seem integrated in the way that Falcons do outside zone, and they run a lot of boot action off of that, and it makes it very easy to really set up defenses play after play after play after play when they're clicking. And the Chargers, it seems like they have a couple of good plays, and then they have plays that make no sense after that, and they don't get anything off of it. So the hope is that they find their stride, and what you'll look for is probably a lot of crossing routes early for them. That would be a good sign if they're hitting those. And then for the Eagles side, yes, running the ball and being able to get into that second and third level with the run.
Mike McCoy now in Denver, who at least for 2 games, they were mixing it up pretty well. And we'll see what they do. Actually, let's go ahead and go straight to that game. Gene, what should we take out of this news? I mean, obviously, we're not playing Michael Crabtree. We might not have been anyway. But what do we take out of this news that he was downgraded? How does this affect his outlook for next week in the season?
Well, what was being reported this morning is that it was a lung contusion, a bruise to the tissue of the lung itself. And I don't know if it meant that, sometime on Thursday or Friday, they did another imaging study and showed that the injury hadn't healed well enough to allow him to go out and play. This is different than a rib injury. This is different than SC strains and things like that. This is an organ injury that has to heal. And it's more than just pain control. It is more than location of the injury. So it's going to have to show interval healing for that to be the case. And if it's not healed well enough for him to practice 5 to 7 days after the injury, you have to consider him questionable for next week as well. That's not to say that he won't be able to go, but this isn't something that Crabtree can play through in the same way that he's played through ankle issues and other things earlier in his career. So Crabtree, no chance of going today after the doubtful downgrade and now knowing what the injury is. We're just going to have to wait and see how he looks on Wednesday.
Well, Matt, it sets up some interesting fantasy questions. I'm sure you've gotten a few. Does that mean start Amari Cooper? He's going to get peppered with targets. Or is it Marshawn Lynch in a valiant performance getting 20 or 25 carries? Or is it Jared Cook in the middle of the field? Dare I perish the thought even thinking of Cordero Patterson shows he can be a wide receiver in the NFL, or is this just too much for a Raiders offense that is coming in with their tail between their legs? They were already outmanned, outgunned, out-hit, out-whatever against Washington last week. And we don't think of Washington as an elite defense. Denver's at home. This is a kind of an early AFC West supremacy game, or at least who's going to challenge the Chiefs. Are we fading the whole Raiders offense this week without Crabtree?
Well, I think if we're going to go down the narrative section of this, that part of that narrative of last week is that they had to travel across the country, and teams don't do very well when they travel across the country for a road game. So, and because they were good early enough to beat the Titans, because they were good early enough, that they had a decent start to the season, I think that you have to sometimes look at that and say they had a bad game. If you can say the narrative is they got out hit and outplayed, and then you're looking at a team that was flat, and not because they lack talent. And I think that when you start looking at division games take on a whole other flavor, where, the Ravens Steelers matchup is a good example of that. The Ravens look crappy, early this year. They don't even have personnel, but we're looking at that game as if it's going to be a closer game, that it's going to be a hard hitting, well contested matchup. And I think that we should give the same due to the Raiders versus the Broncos, because they actually have more talent. They don't have as many injuries to personnel. And yeah, Amari Cooper's been dropping the football. I think he'll get better. And, Michael Crabtree and Cooper can run routes. I think that will be helpful against against a man coverage type of unit like them. They'll run more crossing routes probably in this game, again, because that's how you beat man coverage a lot. And then they'll, hopefully they'll be able to establish the run. And if they do that, they use Marshawn Lynch a little bit more. Hopefully this will be the time. If they start using Marshawn Lynch early and often, and he's generating gains, that's going to be a good sign. And it might be a good sign for him to be ramped up a little bit more as the season goes on. But, I'm not starting Amari Cooper, with all that said, just because I have better options that I feel comfortable with. But if I have reserve level options with bad matchups, I'm still going with Cooper. You still go to the well with him, because he is going to get targets, and he should make some plays, just like someone like Michael Crabtree should. And when you look at the linebacker play, you might want to take a chance. But to me, this is not a game where you stack Raiders. You select your best matchup and you basically say, all right, I'm going to take a chance. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. What about, so Trevor Siemian in week 1 and 2, CJ Anderson in week 2, outstanding plays. Week 3, they go to Buffalo. And as you said, going across the country, Siemian looks like 2016 Siemian. They're not finishing drives. CJ Anderson in a full split with Jamal Charles. It sounds like Devontae Booker is healthy enough to play, but might be a healthy scratch in this one. Matt, do you dabble in Siemian? Do you dabble in Anderson? Or, going home, it's Oakland's defense. We're not afraid of Oakland's defense. Do you go with these options even though they stung you if you played them in week 3?
Yeah, because they're good football players, or at least they're on good offenses, and they're playing a team that I think that they can be able to handle defensively on that side of the ball. So, and I do think, that cross country thing's interesting. I'm just sitting here watching this game here, and I was reading about Elon Musk and his SpaceX rocket, and how that he's announced practical applications for 2022 where you could travel across the country in one of his rockets, and it will take a transcontinental trip, or across the country trip would be 22 minutes, something like that, in one of his rockets. So I'm thinking Roger Goodell is probably like just unbelievably excited about the idea of being able to send people on a rocket ship for an hour-long flight to London from wherever they're going. We might not have any more games in the United States at this rate.
No, it's true. And it's funny you say that. This is like me coming totally out of left field, but I was actually just having a conversation with somebody about the idea that it makes sense. When we were kids, now I'm really going on a tangent, but I can't stop myself. When we were kids, we heard more about how national boundaries were going to mean less in the future, and it was going to become more of an international world, the new world order. We're going to turn this into a totally different show this morning. But it makes sense that, with these London games, I think the NBA may be the first ones to truly do it, where you have franchises around the world. And certainly the London Jaguar as well. We may not be that far away from that. Gene, how far away are we from being okay with Carlos Hyde in our lineup for this matchup? And it is not a great matchup. Arizona's had a pretty good run defense. He's a game time decision. Didn't take long. And, there's some of these situations, and Ty Montgomery being one of the latest, where you feel that little twinge with Carlos Hyde. We felt it every year, and it's week 4, and we're already talking about Carlos Hyde injury situations.
Yeah, and these oblique muscle injuries are difficult. It's being called a hip injury, but it's more of a, that abdominal muscle kind of comes down to the front of your pelvis and hip bone. It's not the same as a hip pointer or a hip flexor, but it's difficult because every time he twists and moves, he's going to feel it, and it's something that's going to be very difficult to manage from a pain perspective, and it's not something that can be wrapped up and supported in an easy way to play. And you could see that he had a level of discomfort with it early in the game last Thursday and was able to come back and play pretty effectively. But as we often see with soft tissue injuries, they get a little bit worse. There's swelling involved and other issues that happen. And this type of injury is going to be difficult for him to play through. So to hear Kyle Shanahan say that he's definitely still hurting and that he considers him a game time decision, I don't know that that means he's not going to play, but I think it's hard to expect that he'll be as effective this week with the injury as he was last week within the moment. So, and it's possible that he could have aggravations, get a little bit more limited workload than we can expect. I think it's likely that he's going to play. I don't think I'd consider him to the doubtful side of questionable, but it's going to be a series to series, snap to snap situation for him.
Does anybody else want to hear Gene say, "I'll be back" this morning?
Yeah, I'll be back. It's when he gets the page from the medical emergency. He will tell us he'll be back. Matt, what's sadder, Adrian Peterson in a Saints uniform or Franco Harris in a Seahawks uniform?
Adrian Peterson in a Saints uniform, but I had to think about that one. I really did. Maybe it's because I was just glad to see Franco Harris gone as a kid that he was in a Seahawks uniform. But Adrian Peterson, yeah, this is just sad. It's just like putting a bull in a crate,
in a petting zoo. It's like putting a bull in a petting zoo.
Yeah.
On the San Francisco Arizona front, Matt, is Pierre Garcon the electric fence that'll zap you because of Patrick Peterson, or do we see enough from San Francisco's offense, Brian Hoyer starting to get it together, that we go with him is really, especially with Carlos Hyde dinged, the only, this is an interesting tension in fantasy football, right? Because on one hand you say, well, Carlos Hyde's banged up, that's all they've got. It's Pierre Garcon, it's Kyle Shanahan's offense peppering a wide receiver one, but on the other hand, it's Patrick Peterson, and if they know Garcon's all there is, it should be that much easier to take him out of the game plan.
It should be, but at the same time, this is a team that, to me, I look at Pierre Garcon and Marvin Jones, and they're very similar types of players in terms of, like, they're not really wide receiver ones, but they're very good wide receiver twos. And when you have a guy like Patrick Peterson covering them, it's going to be difficult. The difference is that Garcon should have a better game than what Jones had sans the touchdown, because of the fact that they run crossing routes. And it's even a guy like Patrick Peterson can't keep up with you all the time on a crossing route. And because that's an embedded part of their game plan, he should have more receptions. I just don't think he's going to have any big plays. So when they go downfield, you're basically taking a shot on Marquise Goodwin. That's basically the guy he's going to get the easier matchup against Justin Bethel. They're going to try and throw it deep to him. If there's a player I'd take a chance on with the 49ers in the passing game, that would be it. And I'm not, exactly pleased by having a Ted Ginn light, in that situation. But if you have to, that's the one I would consider.
Gene, we led about a situation not that we'll be thinking about today, but tonight. Let's jump ahead to tomorrow night. We do have all the practice information now and the reports. We've got a lot of Washington players to sift through here. We've got Rob Kelly and Jordan Reed, who did not play last week, but also Jamison Crowder, who is actually in a pretty good matchup here as some secondary receivers. Whoever Marcus Peters isn't covering has done pretty well against the Chiefs this year. What can we extrapolate from what we know, both the hard information and some of the soft information about seeing how they've handled Reed, how they've handled Kelly, going into Monday night, having to make decisions about Monday night today?
Yeah, this is a struggle. I think the decision for all three of these players is in the hands of Washington's medical staff at this point, other than Rob Kelly. Rob Kelly's going to play, but they're going to limit his workload a fair amount for sure. Jordan Reed has been confident he's going to play. Jamison Crowder was a late week add to the injury report. It's unclear. His status is still kind of up in the air. And I think both of those players are going to have to talk the medical staff into allowing them to go. Washington has a bye week next week in week 5, so they've got another couple of weeks to heal, and you would think both of those guys have a much better chance of obviously not aggravating the injury if they don't play, but being healthier as they go into week 6 and beyond if they don't go this week. They've been allowed to do some limited work in practice. There are some good video clips of Rob Kelly looking fluid and moving well, and the same with Jordan Reed. But they have not tested their ability to take a hit or being taken to the ground or being used in any sort of blocking scheme. So there's a risk of snap to snap and series aggravation with both these guys as well. Looks like Kelly will be active. I would handicap the odds on Jordan Reed being active is relatively high. I think he's likely to play. It's difficult to know how these guys are going to finish the game and how long they'll be able to go. And if you do plan to have them in your lineup, try to find a hedge, and that's going to be a lot easier said than done with Jordan Reed. Unless you've already backed him up with Vernon Davis, there's really no other option. So you have to go into that, if you play him, with the understanding that you may end up with a 2-catch for minimal yardage game. And if you got another player that you think has at least got that expectation or higher, then I think you might want to go that direction. So I still think there's a chance that Reed won't play, but if that's the best you've got, because you said, as you noticed, Bloom, the tight end position is a difficult one recently, then you can go that direction. But ceiling on all those guys is low this week.
Real fascinating matchup, Matt, Monday night. One of the better matchups of the week. We did have in primetime Washington ambushed Oakland. This one's an Arrowhead. Could the right answer here be Washington's going to get ambushed? Don't play Cousins. Don't play any of the offensive players. I'm sure you might have some things to say about Samaje Perine, how he looked in his, and he might be the healthier of the two running backs. There's questions about Chris Thompson, the hot crap shooter, just rolling 7-7-7. Did we go ahead and leave our money on the table with Chris Thompson in this one? Washington's offense has shown us, some different facets, but they have seemed to be devoted to the run. It does seem like there's something there against Kansas City, against the run. Kansas City, even though they are a good defense in some ways, have given up some points and yards, but will they give up enough tomorrow night to dabble in that Washington offense?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation, and I'd say that Chris Thompson is probably the one worth the start at this stage, because the pass defense is very good at really jumping passing lanes, but it's more on the outside. They're a very good outside unit, perimeter unit. In the middle of the field, when you're facing, the linebackers and the safeties are hard hitting and they're aggressive. But I think Thompson's a very good mismatch for pretty much anybody that they put out there, unless Justin Houston covers him. And I don't think they're going to put Justin Houston in coverage when, in 1.7 seconds, he's in the quarterback's face. So I think that when you look at it from that standpoint, Thompson's the safest. Then if you're looking for, just a calculated hope for a player, then yeah, you're going to look at one of these running backs and hope that they get enough volume to do you well. And then otherwise, to me, it's really about the Chiefs at this stage, looking at their offense and continuing to stick with them, because Andy Reid has proven that he and his staff do a good job of game planning with what they're doing. I would expect more sacks in this game for Alex Smith. He has been sacked, I think, the third most times in the NFL. And a lot of it is that they're running a lot of empty sets, and they know that Kareem Hunt hasn't shown that he's yet a blocker that they need him to be, and they don't have anybody else in there, and they don't want to be predictable. But as a result, he's taken about 4 to 5 sacks a game. And Preston Smith looks awfully good. We may not love what Washington's doing all overall, but man, Preston Smith had himself a night against the Raiders, and he's been good at the beginning of the year. And I think they'll get some pressure on Alex Smith. So IDP alert, I definitely take a look at Washington's defense. Kerrigan and Smith is 2 good examples of that.
Yeah, Junior Collette hasn't worked out. Trent Murphy is suspended, but the edge rush is still there. Force player, Justice Mosqueda. And if you haven't checked out In the Trenches, Matt Batanti and Justice Mosqueda, who long before it was cool to be paying attention to trench play, these guys were really putting the jeweler's eye on it and putting a closer look on this stuff. And they're breaking down these matchups for us with a little bit of a fantasy slant. One of the better features of many wonderful features at footballguys.com. You went over it, Gene, with Sam Bradford And just to give us a little bit of a reminder, we talked about this on Thursday. Just you made it seem like this isn't something where, okay, well, Case Keenum starting this week, that means chances are Bradford will be back next week. You laid it out in such a way that this could be a somewhat longer absence for Bradford. Lay that out for the folks.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a week-to-week situation. When we learned about the bone bruise and the visit to Dr. Andrews last weekend, we talked and said, this is going to go one of two ways. Either Bradford will have been told that he can continue to practice while he's rehabbing, or that he should just shut it down for a period of time. And knowing that we're going into 3 weeks, this could turn into a 4 to 6 week situation. And then the concern may become, where is Teddy Bridgewater and his recovery? How is Case Keenum playing, and how does that play into things? I do not think this is going to be a long-term situation. Bradford and Dr. Andrews and now the Vikings are taking this in such a way that it looks unlikely that it's going to linger. And that is the goal with this. That's the goal of allowing him to rest this, rather than trying to bounce around and do some limited work in the pocket. I think next week is a possibility, but the fact that they entirely shut him down this week means that he is going to have to be very comfortable in the pocket and moving without any limitation at all before they put him back on the field, especially if Case Keenum has another week this week as he did last. So bye week is a little bit down the ways yet for Minnesota. So let's call him Bradford. That is questionable for next week. And then we're going to get an indication pretty soon, with Bridgewater being allowed to practice shortly, how this situation is going to play out for both of those guys from an injury standpoint.
So the reason I asked Gene to give us that setup, Matt, is the setup is, do we say, I mean, there was a time when Keenum and Andre Johnson were rolling with the Texans, but do we say that Case Keenum is someone that we consider in our lineup, or at the very least, do we say we saw enough going against Detroit? And Detroit's funny because they have some defensive touchdowns. They've had some moments against Carson Palmer in week 1. It feels like with Matt Ryan, the Falcons could have scored a lot more points last week than they did. It isn't like Detroit's defense has been good. Playing the Giants, how can we really think much about that? It isn't like Detroit's defense has been good, but they're not necessarily a pushover. What do we think about that passing game that looked so good against the Bucks, who, again, the Bucks had like half of their defense down last week? What sense can we make out of the Vikings offense?
I think that what you have to do is make the assumption that, again, the deciding factor for this offense is the offensive line. And because the offensive line is healthy and it's playing well and they can generate a run game, they're getting balance. And that means that the receivers that they have, who are very good, it's just a matter of Case Keenum getting the ball to the correct spot. And I think that he's been shown that he's capable of doing that when he has time. And I think that the Minnesota Vikings will continue to give him time. So if you're looking for someone who you may have to replace, Cam Newton with, or any other underperforming quarterback, he's not a bad option, just because, again, you're looking at him he's not carrying the offense. The offensive line's carrying this offense, which is the way it's supposed to be.
And Dalvin Cook.
And Dalvin Cook, exactly. And because of that, that makes him a viable option, because he has the balance. He's able to work within a game plan as opposed to have to create outside the game plan. So, yeah, I feel good about that.
Really quick, because I don't know if I've ever asked you this. And was Adam Thielen at all on your radar? Is this one of the situations? Because and one of the things that gets overlooked is the NFL teams can bring in unlimited players that are within a certain radius of the franchise, right? And Thielen was in the Minnesota State, was it like Minnesota State Mankato, or I don't remember. Yeah. So kudos to the Vikings, because I think they might have been the only ones that saw the potential for Thielen, and man, is it coming through.
He's been excellent.
Yeah, and just a player that's really getting better. And they also made, kudos to Rick Spielman for getting that extension done this season, and it's obviously going to be at a discount. Gene, it was a bit chaotic on Thursday night as we were getting information on Ty Montgomery. We were getting information on Jamal Williams. We hear broken ribs, no timeline, but then Adam Schefter comes in and tells us on Friday that maybe not as bad as feared. Matt Waldman gave us an excellent breakdown on UTEP and El Paso native Aaron Jones. Now, with things calmed down a little bit, what have we learned about Ty Montgomery and the Packers' backfield going into Week 5?
I don't think we've learned enough. I think that Somebody has to have told Ian Rappaport that there were more than one ribs. You don't usually mishear ribs versus rib, and that would have been something that he would have followed up on. So, maybe in the sense that the injuries weren't as displaced or there wasn't cartilage involved or something like that, it's hard to reconcile those two reports as being about the same player. So probably hear a little bit more from Mike McCarthy on Monday night when the Packers have their usual press conference. We'll definitely know a little bit more as we get into Wednesday and Thursday, but it's going to be hard to plan ahead. I think I would get as many of these guys on your roster as possible and see what happens. I think it's good that the trend is positive for both Montgomery and Williams, that there aren't larger injuries that are definite, prolonged, and multi-week absences, and by that I mean 4+ weeks rather than just 1 or 2. And both of them could play, and I don't think we're going to know. The Packers we know are conservative, so if there's something that they have concerns about, they're likely to hold players out, especially knowing that all 3 of those guys can be productive. But we've seen it with the offensive line players. They are just not going to let these guys play through injuries that might be aggravating or limit their ability to play in future weeks. They gave Cobb an extra week so that he was able to go on Thursday, and they've given other players the same. So it's a tough situation to follow. Hopefully we'll know more Monday through Thursday.
Matt, without us being able to know more, isolating just strictly the element of talent, ability, skill, plus situation, without knowing the medical variables that could create opportunity or limit opportunity, how aggressive, and also we don't know, what the waiver wire is going to look like at the end of these games in week 4, but just isolating all those things, would you incline people to be more aggressive or less aggressive as they're bidding on Aaron Jones this week?
I'd probably be less aggressive with that. I like Aaron Jones as a talent, but I don't think the Green Bay Packers see him as a viable answer. Now, he may blow up and have a huge week and they go, we didn't quite know what we had, because you got to remember the dynamics at play when you draft a player is the higher the draft pick, the more chances he gets to show that he's not good. And that's, and really, Ryan Riddle's the one who's written about this a lot. And I always like to reference his great article, and I think it's a timeless article at this stage, because what happens is that the bias, people always like to do their studies and say, in the NFL draft, the higher the pick, generally the more the talent, because when we do the studies, these are the guys that actually start. Well, that's assuming that they made the right decisions on the player, and that they gave equal competition in training camp for players, and they don't do that. Because what they do is a higher end draft pick gets more reps. They give them a chance to play more, whereas a guy who's undrafted generally gets fewer reps. And then what also happens is this level of bias where they see a higher draft pick make mistakes and they go, oh, he'll work through it. Whereas a guy who gets 1 to 2 reps in a session, or 3 to 4 reps in a session, makes one mistake and they say he can't play. So when you look at a guy like Aaron Jones, it's very possible that he just hasn't gotten enough reps for them to know exactly what they have with him, because they drafted Jamal Williams around earlier. They already had Ty Montgomery, who's a young player at the position who has less experience than those 2 guys at the position combined. And they knew that they wanted to get him ready in terms of pass pro and in terms of making sure that he was comfortable in this offense as a relatively inexperienced running back who's going to start for an NFL team. So as a result of that, there is an outcome where Jones plays extremely well. The Packers just stick with them and go kind of breathe a collective sigh of relief until, Montgomery's ready to come back, or Williams is ready to come back. So it looks like his is like a 1 or 2 week injury. We'll see. Then fine. But more likely, if you're going to err on the side of convention, if there's longer term issues with injury for these guys ahead of Jones on the depth chart to begin the week, then most likely they're going to bring somebody in. I would think that they would. And we've seen that the Packers have been willing to trade for running backs or to add running backs to their roster. This is a team that was in the hunt to trade for Marshawn Lynch back in the day. They picked up Kristen Michael back in the day. They've had a few backs like that. I wouldn't be surprised. D'Angelo Williams is sitting around. He can pass protect. He can catch. He's certainly one that can create on his own with his quickness. So, he might be a perfect candidate in that regard, where they may go, we like Aaron Jones, but we can't trust him in situations that we really need a veteran for.
Gene, should we be worried that the specter of back issues have been raised with Julio Jones?
Probably not. He doesn't seem to have any concerns. I would have liked to have seen him get through a full practice on Friday, but to see him not listed on the injury report is definitely reassuring. It seemed precautionary from the Monday press conference when we were told that there was a little bit of something going on. It could be back spasms. It could be just a bruise. It doesn't have to be related to a degenerative condition back there, as we've been concerned about with so many other players. If he continues to be listed that way, if the practice participation becomes more of a concern, if we see him leave the field frequently, then those would all be things that might portend some concern for the rest of the year. But for now, I'm willing to work under the assumption that it's a minor situation that they wanted to do a little bit of veteran rest with this week and not much more than that.
Let's look at that matchup. Buffalo going down to Atlanta. Matt, this is fascinating because Buffalo, I haven't had a lot of pass touchdown yet this year. This is a highly competitive Buffalo team. Now, they've been better at home as far as their offense, but their defense has been good. But then again, their defense has faced the Jets. They faced Josh McCown and Cam Newton and Trevor Siemian. They haven't faced anything like the Atlanta offense. Atlanta's offense really did whatever they wanted against Green Bay. They soundly beat Green Bay in their one home game. Do you see that trend continuing? That Atlanta really outclasses Buffalo, or does Buffalo contain Atlanta's offense enough to say this Bills team is better than we thought?
Yeah, I think this Bills team is better than we thought. And I think that they do contain Atlanta's offense a little bit more because, while we want to, look down at Trevor Siemian on a certain level, they still have a pair of wide receivers who are as good as any wide receiving core in the league in Denver. And Siemian has done a pretty good job there on that front. But I do think that, you look at Alexander and Williams in that front seven, and they're pretty dynamic players who can get the job done. And I think that what we'll see here is that Atlanta will try to match up Tevin Coleman, I think, a little bit more in this game to exploit what, some of the linebacker coverage, because it looked like that, Gaines and Tre'Davious White actually played pretty well against Denver. They tested White early and they got the best of him on a couple of tight routes. And then White came right back and said, "You're not going to fresh fish me this, in this here game." It was kind of one of those situations where he really turned it around and got the better of Emmanuel Sanders. Joking around in my top 10 column with my little fresh fish takes, I wrote down White as like a guy who might be one. And by the end of the game, I scratched it out and said Broncos receivers, because basically he turned the tables on them big time, he and Gaines. And I think that, Julio Jones is, kind of a Demaryius Thomas plus type of player. And that's no slight to Thomas. It's just that's just how, he's even better. And so that's going to be an interesting test for them. But at the same time, I don't think Mohamed Sanu is going to outclass this defensive backfield. And, the best thing to me, it may be Gabriel this week. It may be Tevin Coleman. And Freeman should have a decent day, but I don't think he's going to have a huge one. So I'd be surprised if Atlanta comes out of this, with a 23-7 type of win. I think this is going to be like a 21-17 ball game, 17-14 ball game, where you're happy that your guy got at least some amount of points, and that's Julio Jones. And then maybe, one of the other guys I mentioned there. But I don't think that this is going to be a huge offensive day for most of Atlanta's personnel.
The 3-0 Falcons against the Zay Jones, Tyrod Taylor misconnection, or they're 3-0. Bills.
Yeah, but Charles Clay, they're going to be Charles Clay against that Atlanta, those Atlanta linebackers who are fast, but they are still inexperienced. They still have issues sometimes with, rallying to the ball, with tackling and taking good angles in space. And this is a guy that, if they showed some nice little misdirection work in the red zone. They had a really beautiful play last week where they run, a series of boots, and they run these crossing routes because they don't have any receivers who are unbelievably fast, who also can catch the ball. And so they run these crossing routes against man, and they were doing that effectively against Denver. So they ran kind of a boot action play where you have the crossing route, and instead of throwing the crossing route, Charles Clay released from the same side and just ran up the field and just settled in the middle of the defense in a way that you didn't even see him come free, and Taylor just kind of threw across his body a little bit to him wide open in the end zone for a touchdown. It was a beautiful setup play. If they have more things like that in their playbook, then you could see a pretty nice day for Clay off of those types of things where athletic linebackers tend to overreact.
And what I saw last week from Tyrod Taylor is it really maturing as a quarterback. Just he didn't have his thinking wasn't rushed. He made a lot of throws with some nuance and touch, and really looked like a quarterback that's evolving for the Bills, and took it to a Broncos defense that we haven't seen very many quarterbacks get the upper hand on, especially not when you're throwing to Jordan Matthews and Andre Holmes. Now, granted, the touchdown to Andre Holmes was deflected off the hands of another receiver, but we got about 6-7 minutes left here in our Week 4 preview, Matt. I want to try to do some quick hitters on some things this week. Let's start with these AFC North showdowns. 0-3 Bengals going in to face the 0-3 Browns. How we're not shoehorning our lineup to get Chris Carson in despite the good matchup because of some of the things you laid out. But what about Joe Mixon? Is this a Joe Mixon in your lineup at all costs week?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say he and AJ Green are the two guys that you want to have in your lineups, and you want to have those players available for you because Jamar Taylor has not been very good, and you could see how the Colts schemed against him and just made the most of that. And I think that Cleveland's in a situation where this defense can get tired out, and really that as long as the Bengals, it's a kind of a big if, don't shoot themselves in the foot, then Mixon should be fine. But Mixon looks like it's clearly him about volume, and he is one of those few backs who can actually create on his own despite his offensive line and overcome it. And there aren't many of them. There's maybe about 6 or 7 in the league.
Yeah, the buy low window is closing. Gene, really quick, and Cleveland's going to Cleveland, and some of this is just the football gods. On one hand, Myles Garrett should be back next week, and that's going to be really exciting, especially with Emmanuel Ogbah starting to play better. On the other hand, Jamie Collins has missed 2 weeks now with the concussion. Should we be scared about Jamie Collins?
I think we need to reset our expectations on concussion recovery. Many players have not returned the week after a concussion this year, and I don't know if that's a larger trend in the league or just an anecdotal situation where the majority of these players have had ongoing symptoms. We've seen it with Ryan Schrader. We saw it with a few other players earlier this year. There hadn't been any indication that this is going to be an indefinite absence, but I still believe what I've said for years and years, which is once you get past that first week, you have to very much consider it week to week, and it's an open-ended recovery timetable. And I think as the year goes on, if we see these players come back 2 weeks afterwards rather than just one, then I think the medical staffs may have been changing their opinion on how quickly to return players. But it's too soon to say that. So yes, I do think we have to be a little bit nervous about how soon Collins can come back and whether or not he'll be ready for next week or not.
Yeah, and another one that you didn't bring up, but CJ Fedorowicz had gotten out of concussion protocol before week 1, hits a concussion in week 1, IR. There's no waiting around to see how things are going to go. On that note, Matt, Houston and Tennessee, I've been pushing Ryan Griffin, and I go back, this is one of the original Matt Waldman favorites. He and Deshaun Watson seemed to have a nice connection last week. Do we like Ryan Griffin? And what do we think about Deshaun Watson going into our lineup? Was it just the Patriots defense, or is Deshaun Watson growing up quickly?
I didn't watch that game, so it's hard for me to say at this stage. I know a lot of people were very excited about that, but still kind of the jury's out for me. And New England's defense really has looked pretty bad thus far, so I'm a little bit more cautious on that. But Ryan Griffin's a good matchup, mainly for what you said, that they have shown a connection, and for number 2, the Tennessee Titans defense is number 2 against tight ends in terms of their ability to play. They smell, man. They've never been good against the tight end over the past few years, and I think it will remain that way this week.
Yeah, this one's going to be fun to watch, though. I like the matchup, and this is a bit of an AFC South showdown in the sense that both of these teams should feel really good about where they're at compared to what we thought about them coming out of week 1. So I'll turn back to this Giants-Tampa matchup, Matt. Do we dare? Is this the Lucy in the football with Eli? I mean, the Bucks are missing T.J. Ward, Quan Alexander, Levante David. Noah Spence isn't healthy. Gerald McCoy isn't healthy. But on the other hand, and then we saw the Giants offense come back to life. Brandon Marshall, Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram. Are we being set up, or really go with that Giants pass offense this week?
Yeah, I think you have to go with it, even if you're still still kind of giving it the side eye. That's kind of basically how I feel. Is I never trust Eli Manning with these situations, but on paper, sometimes you just have to go with what's on paper, and on paper, it's too delicious not to consider.
Yeah, and we'll watch, of course, Case Keenum against Detroit and see how much maybe of last week was Case Keenum going against that defense. But Gene, you can't. Am I overstating the importance of the injuries on the Tampa side of the ball defense?
No, I don't think that you can overstate the importance of those injuries. It's three vital members of the back seven. And they complement each other well. So you've lost your two best coverage linebackers. You've lost arguably your best run support safety. And you've got a front four that is struggling to recover from injury and illness and prolonged injury recoveries through the offseason. They're getting some of those players back, and Gerald McCoy is going to play. But, as we talked about on Thursday night, that team is going to have to be able to pressure the quarterback to be able to protect what's going on in the back seven.
Matt, are you joining the Powell movement this week? I know you've been Bilal Powell. You're one of the few champions of Powell coming out of Louisville. Now with Matt Forte battling that turf toe, but it is the Jags defense. Are you giving people a nudge to get Powell in their lineups this week?
Well, it's kind of a funnel in a different way. I mean, they're a good pass defense, very good top pass defense in the NFL in some stats. But that means they're also one of the worst against the run. And Powell's the kind of back that the way that the Jets like to use him, he's not the guy that gets shut down when the team, early on when the team's behind. He's kind of more of a draw play, third down, passing down runner when the boxes aren't there, run to the outside type of thing. So I think that he's someone that you still consider. I'm considering him over Jonathan Stewart this week. So it's, that's kind of where I'm at with him. So yeah, I'm going to the well with him when I can.
I know you didn't ask me, Matt, but I think that Powell over Stewart is an easy call. Last one before we head out the door here. You mentioned Jared Goff, and on one hand, when this offense, it was a little bit of a choppy week against Washington, but against a bad Colts defense, against a bad 49ers defense, Sean McVay, the play designs, the play sequencing, really working on the myriad of weapons. And we know they do get Sammy Watkins back this week. So he's out of concussion protocol. It's Dallas and their secondary. Now they do have all world through 3 games, DeMarcus Lawrence and Malik Collins, an interesting pass rush duo right there. But this is one, whether it's daily fantasy or you're going with a quarterback by committee, because there's a lot of bad matchups for quarterbacks this week. I think there's only 5, 6, 7 quarterbacks that you would look at and automatically start. Do you go back to Goff? Do you expect the Rams' positive offensive trends to continue against the Cowboys?
I do, because the Cowboys don't have a good, back seven in the passing game. And I think that that's going to work just fine. And you got to understand that, it's not necessarily Goff versus Malik Collins or Goff versus Lawrence. It's, a John Sullivan center-led line with Andrew Whitworth against those guys. And I'll match Andrew Whitworth up against almost anybody in terms of his ability to contain pass rush. So I think that from that perspective, and Goff is good against pass pressure, to be honest with you. I thought he was last year. I know a lot of people said he was skittish. I don't know what they're talking about, because this was a guy who I think really understands how to bait pressure and stand in. One thing that he does do that he has to get better at is sometimes he retreats from pressure when he should step up into it. But I think that's been more of a product of what happened last year with a really bad offensive line. This year, I haven't seen as much of that, and he didn't do that much at Cal. He was very good at standing in there, stepping up and firing, and he has really good footwork in terms of when pressure gets close to him, he can step in to a throw with the pressure there or in a compressed pocket and throw from really strong mechanics, whereas guys like Carson Wentz still have their legs concrete, kind of glued to concrete into the ground after they've finished that one movement and try and twist and turn and throw some god-awful balls. And I don't think that Goff really has that issue most of the time. In fact, I think he's really good at it and one of the better quarterbacks at it in terms of guys who've come out in the past few years. So now that he has an offensive line, he's beginning to look like that first overall draft pick. And I think it's going to continue against the Cowboys this week.
I'll match Gene Bramwell and Matt Waldman against anybody getting to do this pregame show every week. And I'll match just about anything else on your programming over this Saints-Dolphins game, as we do get a field goal going into the half. But this game looks like one where they're just like, hey, let's just let's enjoy London. Let's get out on the town. Let's enjoy the double decker buses. The game isn't
Fingers
really,
and mash.
yeah, exactly. The game isn't really that important. Hopefully, you're not relying too much for this game. In your fantasy lineups, still have a football left to play. Still a whole slate of games. Still, week 4, week 17 weeks of the NFL season. 16 weeks of most fantasy football seasons. We enjoy taking this journey with you every year. We enjoy having you here on Sundays and Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays and Fridays, Saturdays, 8 days a week. The Audible, footballguys.com. Thank you, everybody, for supporting us. It's a privilege to serve. And maybe it's not a privilege to watch this game right now, but it'll be a privilege to enjoy the week 4 slate with y'all. We'll see you on the flip side. Stay classy.